Good afternoon. I'm Mitchell Moss of the NYU Wagner School of Public Service. I'm delighted to be with you today on Good Friday to talk about how disasters shape New York City. This is the second of two talks about the way in which the coronavirus has influenced New York. And today we're going to discuss the political and economic implications of this. We're going to have a great talk by the Dean of the Wagner School next week, Sherry Glide, about health policy. So we're going to talk about some of the ways in which this is affecting the day-to-day life of New York and the future of our city as well. So we're going to start now. And let me first begin by discussing some of the economic challenges we're facing. Every day we hear about bodies, tests, deaths. Well, I think we have to understand that the impact of this virus goes far beyond the people who are physically ill and who actually have died, but it goes to the whole city because we've seen a massive change in the day-to-day life of New York simply because we've closed up so much of the businesses. And just to talk about this, even the mayor has recognized that at least 500,000 New Yorkers will be unemployed. There are other models coming out of the Economic Policy Institute which suggest that it'll be 1 million people. We do know it's going to be certainly much larger than what we had after 2008 and certainly after 2001. And right now we are seeing really projections for about 750,000 coming from James Parrott, who used to be with the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Now, even Barron's has made New York the cover story this week and has pointed out that the effects on this city's economy will be something like 15% of the payroll of New York. But more importantly, it's going to hit some groups worse than others, especially people in, I would say, restaurants where there are about 225,000 people, food workers of different sorts, those people who are involved in transportation. The Uber and Lyft business and taxi business has been reduced by about 90%. And we're seeing a vast kind of reduction in people flying. Of course, JFK accounts for 50,000 jobs. So this is something which is pervasive. It's not just in the hospitals. The effects of this especially are felt by people in the performing arts and culture since we've closed the theaters, we've closed the off-Broadway theaters and even the venues at night. And so there has been a dramatic cutback of people who lived with part-time work, hourly work. Some of those people are having a difficult time getting unemployment insurance. As many of you know, New York State has lagged in its ability to respond, though they now hired more workers. The pressure on the unemployment insurance was so severe, people were spending days just getting on the phone. So now we have a crisis of people who are without jobs, and even more, we're seeing layoffs. Yesterday, law firms laid off people, and we saw, in fact, major firms having a 15% cut in their salaries. I think that we should know that the effect of having no economic activity is so profound that even organizations that might think they'd be immune to this are feeling the pinch. And I think you should just know that out on Long Island, there's a growth in Long Island as unemployment because so many of the people who work there, the electricians who come in every day to kind of fix our infrastructure, well, they're also not working because we've stopped almost all construction except that's vital. Now, who is being hurt? Well, let me start by pointing out that we do know that Latinos are accounting for about, about 4 in 10 Latinos have lost their jobs because of this. And I think we should recognize that the people who are hardest hit were the ones who were in bad shape to begin with. Today's front page of the New York Times has discovered the borough of Queens. As you may know, the New York Times is largely concerned with the 5 boroughs of Montclair, Scarsdale, Brooklyn Heights, Riverdale, and the Upper West Side. They have almost the lowest circulation of any major daily in its hometown. They have about 330,000 in New York City. It's a global paper. That's why they cover so much of the global economy and less of New York's. But they discovered Queens today. We have to congratulate them for that. But the key part to understand is that the workers who are involved in taking care of people, who are involved in essential services, those are working neighborhoods. They don't have the freedom of social distancing. They don't really have the chance to work it remotely from home. And what we are seeing is that it's the working class of the city which is being hurt, both in terms of being exposed to the illness and the disease and also losing their jobs. So it's a double damaging to this group. Even as I pointed out, Uber and taxi drivers, and as you may know, over 90% of all taxi drivers are immigrants. So these are working people, and if they're not having any fares, they don't have an income, and getting unemployment insurance is now possible in New York, but it's a challenge. Finally, I think we should recognize that the effect of having no income for people who are low income or loss of jobs is that there's now a new pressure to provide kind of these people with rent-free apartments. New York, as you know, has 67% rental, about 1/3 owned. That's the reverse of the nation. And even Congress has a proposal now to help people who are renting to get through this crisis. Now, it's not clear Congress is going to do much, but it's going to be something which New York politicians are going to face, because paying rent has now become something you can avoid for 3 months, according to the state of New York, without an eviction. But there's now a real concern for how can we make it possible for people who have lost their jobs to live in their apartments without paying rent. And will the federal government do something? If they won't, the pressure will be on the state and localities. I also want to make a point that whatever you may have thought about inequality, this is intensifying it in New York, because the downturn in the economy is being felt by those people who already didn't have great health services, they didn't have great health resources, and as I said, they often didn't have regular steady incomes. So inequality is going to intensify, not diminish, because of this. Now, I want to point out that we have lived in very, very robust times since really 2010. The good times are over. And if you don't know it, I assure you most New Yorkers know it. And it goes from the small shopkeeper who is supplying food to restaurants, to even the major real estate firms. There are fewer and fewer people who can even show their homes, much less to sell their homes. And so this economy in New York is suffering from the top to the bottom. Even the very wealthy, and we're finding out, are going to be in a tough position because, there is a vast kind of set of luxury apartments. In fact, there's a glut of them, and they're going to continue to be vacant for a long time. Even the city controller has found a voice here. He points out that we have $1.5 billion of revenue loss in the city budget just this year, and next year it's going to be $4.6 billion. I think he's being a little too conservative. It could be worse, but I think the point here is that we are seeing the loss of revenue. And why has that happened? Because New York depends on property taxes for about $30 billion. We depend on income taxes, and we depend on sales taxes and lots of other things. But we collect about $60+ billion a year and then get the rest from state and federal government. Well, the revenue streams are collapsing. The only one that's really stable is property, which is about $30 billion a year, because we count on tourists, and we had 67,000 tourists last year. There are no tourists in New York. In fact, the hotel rooms now are really 90% vacant. That's why they're giving them out free to physicians. Even the MTA, which has had a tough time because ridership is down over 80%, as I pointed out, but the commuters are down 90%. But worst of all is that the transit workers, who have tough physical conditions to begin with, exposed to the air underground and to the kind of working conditions on the tracks, they've seen, a lot of injuries, a lot of layoffs. A lot of people who are calling in sick, and about 40 transit workers are already dead, not all from the virus, but many of those people have pre-existing conditions. The shortfall in workers is making it difficult to even staff the trains at the full service level people are used to. And I think the worst case for everyone in New York, may not realize, is that the bridges and tunnels are declining so much that the surplus we used to get from the MTA bridges and tunnels, that means the Triborough Bridge, never liked the name Robert F. Kennedy Bridge. He was barely a senator, should have gotten something named, but not that bridge. We like bridges that reflect the names of the areas they serve. So the Triborough Bridge is down, Henry Hudson Bridge is down, and I think most importantly, even the Hugh Carey Bridge is down, so that the tunnel, so we are seeing a sheer collapse in the revenue that subsidizes our subways, because over $1 billion a year went from those bridge and tunnel tolls to the subways. So all in all, the MTA, which is a vital part of our city and the region, is going to be in a really cash short position for a while. And they have been most concerned, and I give them credit, for now at least making sure they're taking the temperature of the areas where their frontline workers are. I always tell people there's nothing like going into a subway station in the middle of the summer. Some of those temperatures are 110 degrees. That's not good for anyone, although the trains are air conditioned, but they're now making sure that the workers at least have temperatures that are in the normal range, because right now there really is a challenge for the MTA to find a way to make it possible for the subways, when we do come back, to get people to feel comfortable riding them. And I think I mentioned the luxury market. Now, why do I mention this? Well, that's because last year, or 2 years ago, pardon me, we imposed a mansion tax. So any property selling for over $1 million has a tax. And that some of it goes to the city and some of it goes to the MTA. And the tax is very progressive. So the higher the price of the property, the higher the tax. And right now, we only found last week, really shocking, that, tiny number of contracts for luxury apartments. And we're going to see what I call, 57th Street empty out. I mean, it's really a case where, those were apartments designed for, very wealthy individuals, and no one is showing them, no one is selling them. And so I think we can say the luxury market is going to be a very, very weak market. And that hurts the city and the MTA revenues. Now, the question really to pose is, what does it mean for politics in New York? Because this economy is not sitting alone. It's part of a city's active kind of political system, and it's affecting people in different ways. I just want to point out to you, this is the turnout for elections by different ethnic and racial groups in 2013. I can't see the end of my chart here because of the screen, but let me just show you. Different people vote in different ways, and as you can see, the white population has the highest rate of turnout in Democratic primary. I use the Democratic primary for one reason. The Republican Party is a very, very marginal player in city elections, with the exception of some major events. It's 2001. But, even when, I bet no one remembers when Bill de Blasio ran, he had a tough candidate. It was Nicole Malikatakis. She's from Staten Island now. She is a person who got 280,000 votes. He got about 75% of the vote. So the Republican Party doesn't have a great kind of a presence in New York. It's a Democratic city. And that means the Democratic primary is where the candidate will probably be chosen. I just want to point out, the real challenge is to raise the turnout of the Hispanic, Asian, and Black groups, which are voting at much lower rates than the white population. Take a look carefully. The Hispanic population is about 29% of the city's demography totally, and they voted under 20% in the Democratic primary. The Black population is about 24%. They voted a little over, just about 22%. And I must say the Asian population does vote above their share. So they voted 20% in the primary. As you can see, but they're about 16 or 15% of the city's population. So the question is, will the Democratic primary change the way, will it become a new way in which people can express their concerns rather than be this kind of modest turnout by Asian, by African American, and by Blacks? And this is a real test for the 2021 election. Now, why do I raise it now? Because the presidential primary in New York has been delayed to June. It's no longer contested. At one time, we thought it'd be a lively race. Now it's going to be a kind of a very, very uncontested one because there is no challenger really to Joe Biden. But so the Democratic primary in 2021 is going to be a very important source of candidates because, as you know, term limits makes it an open race. Now, I think I should point out to you, not only are jobs affecting the Latino and African American community, they're affecting, of course, the racial character of those who are, dying. This has been cited in the media recently. The governor had a very important press conference yesterday in which he showed the difference between the share of the population and the share of the death. I'm not going to go into details, but we do know that the African American Latino community are feeling the death at higher levels than their population in the city. And here is but the real point I want to make is in terms of per 100,000, the Hispanics, are much, and then the Black community are suffering at a much greater level than, of course, the Black and than the white and the Asian population. And as you can see, that there's a disproportionate impact, on Hispanic and Black people from this virus. Dr. Fauci has explained it. It's, of course, it's not the virus, but the underlying conditions some of the people had, as well as the work they do, which brings them in contact with people, which then makes them, really more vulnerable than others who can be able to social distance. Now, what this is going to do, I believe, it's going to turn into the basis for a massive shift in activism in New York. In 2021, we'll have about 36 term-limited city council seats, perhaps more, because so many of them are going to be out of a job. That means we're going to have hundreds of people running for office. Each city council only has about 150,000 residents, and you can win a city council race with under 5,000 votes. And so we're going to have a very contested and lively set of people running for office at the local level, because the city council does have public financing. It does have kind of a small geographic kind of community you can mobilize votes in. And we're going to see, throughout all of the boroughs, lots of openings for people to run for office. And the reason I raise this is because there's lots of good reason to run. Health and housing are suddenly going to be on the municipal agenda. Health, because we've seen that Queens has been kind of underserved in terms of its health capacities. The hospitals there that are under stress are, Elmhurst and Jamaica Hospital, as well as others, certainly Flushing. These hospitals are doing as much as they can. I've often wondered, why in the world would anyone put a hospital ship on the Hudson River instead of on Bowery Bay, or certainly on the East River at the State Park in Long Island City? So we build hospital capacity precisely where there isn't a need. And I think this is one of the striking questions that someone's had to ask. Even the Javits Center, much as it's a beautiful center, that's not where the need is. The need is really, as I said earlier, I think last time, in the high schools, Christ the King High School, Jamaica High School, Astoria High School, certainly the Automotive Trades High School in Williamsburg. So we're going to have activity at the city council level. But most of all, we're going to have it on the mayor's race. And the reason that's important is because the mayor in New York is the central political figure. He is the only person with the authority to actually get things done in the city. He appoints over 65 commissioners. They don't have anybody to be confirmed except for a handful. The city council tried to make a small dent in this. They are commissioners who can be removed for cause. He has control largely over a $95 billion budget, $95 billion. And although much of that money is tied in contracts for people, there's a lot you can do, as he's tried to do, on things that you care about, such as his famous failure, with the Thrive program. So I think we have to recognize the mayoral race is not going to be something which is going to be limited to the candidates we know now. And there's a reason. People are going to care who the mayor is. I want to say something. This is pulled, and I want to thank Rachel Wise who worked in this. This is pulled from on the same day what the mayor of New York said and what the mayor of Los Angeles said. Now, just remember, the same day they both tweeted, this is what the mayor of New York said, March 2nd. This is really just over a month ago. Since I'm encouraging New Yorkers to go on with your lives, get out of the town despite coronavirus, I thought you might offer some suggestions. And he's then recommending they go out to the theater or a film. Let me tell you, the same day, what does Mayor London Breed of San Francisco? Prepare for possible disruption, get a supply of essential medications, make a child care plan how to manage if a school closing occurs, take care of a sick family relative, or what you're gonna do if you get sick yourself. Two mayors, two big cities. One is let the good times roll, and the other is let's get ready. I don't think there's any question here that New York was very slow to respond. We had a great health department. Their intelligence and brains weren't put to work by the City Hall operatives. And New York, and yesterday Tom Frieden suggests there's some severe loss of life. We do know one thing. At the same day, in the same year, facing the same crisis, the mayor of San Francisco did the right thing. Now, there have been a lot of articles about the current mayor, and I just want to make a couple points here. The next election is going to be a challenge for New Yorkers because they're going to say, it's not who can't rise to the occasion, it's going to be who can rise to the occasion. And we're going to be looking for a different kind of mayor. I think the reason I say this is suddenly we're going to be aware that even though New York is doing some great things, for example, we're now feeding, at food centers, 490 around the city with Catherine Garcia doing this. They were doing a lot of good things in terms of, the nonprofits contributing funds. I saw, the Ford Foundation and Bloomberg Philanthropies. But the real point is the city is going to be forced, I think, to recognize that it needs to focus on disaster management and response. And this is going to be a crucial issue. We are not going to have any chance for a mayor who's just kind of a happy-go-lucky cheerleader. The next mayor is going to be facing three things. One, the fact that the recovery may not have occurred. All these people who think there's going to be a bounce are seriously deluded. New York City isn't going back to normal. We are all going to change how we live. And until we have confidence in going to the theater and going to work and getting on the subway, this city's recovery is going to be slow. The second part is, even when there is a recovery, it's going to take time because restaurants aren't going to fill up, and it will take time for people to get comfortable going to concerts and plays and things of this sort. The second part is not just the nature of the recovery. The city's finances are going to be weak because revenues are drawn from income and from sales and property, and all three are down. It's not just one, all three. We're not selling and buying property at the same level. we have fewer people earning money. Even the firms that aren't going to lay people off, they're not giving pay raises. Princeton University yesterday said they're freezing all salaries. Well, if a university with a $25 billion endowment can freeze salaries, take my word, every university, every institution, nonprofit is going to be freezing the salaries. And we're going to see even cutbacks in the 403 contributions. So I think the second part, there's going to be less money coming to the public sector. They're going to bigger choices they have to make, because you certainly are going to be in a situation where revenues are down and the burdens are greater. And the third part is New York has to find a way to convey that it's going to be a city that is safe, not just from crime, but from the risk of disease. And that's going to be a mayor who understands science, who cares about security, and recognizes that we have to invest in the health capacity of our city. Even though we have limited resources, we have to find a way to make the place safe. Because if we don't have that confidence, and I really do believe the challenge in New York is to make people feel safe and confident about the city, then we're going to see gradually kind of an erosion of population and unwillingness of businesses to expand, and most of all, people not being comfortable going out and enjoying everything they wanted to get from New York. So let me thank you and then open it up for questions.
First question, regarding economic effects, do you see this downturn increasing New York City's and other cities' dependence on private investment and development to bring in capital?
I think the private sector is experiencing some areas of boom, like sanitizers and medical equipment, but lots of areas of decline. So people aren't buying automobiles. The travel industry is certainly going to be in the doldrums for a while. And so I don't think the private sector works in New York without the public sector creating the conditions. So I think first, the public sector creates the conditions to attract private sector funding. The private sector is not coming here just for the, there's going to be more risk aversion in the private sector than ever before. So the public sector has to find a way to attract private investment. I think that's the future. That's actually how it worked. We built subways, people then built housing near the subways.
Do you think the popularity of progressive economic and environmental policy can thrive post-coronavirus in New York City?
Well, I think New Yorkers are becoming quite aware that clean air is an important part of their actual longevity. I think environmental awareness is built in, I think, to many people's awareness, but I think especially because of the dangers posed by asthma. According to the research, asthma, high blood pressure, diabetes are highly, those are the conditions that particularly make people vulnerable to coronavirus really seriousness. So yes, I think the physical environment is an essential part. And I think the other point we know is that we have seen how much New Yorkers need the parks now. The mayor and the governor closed the playgrounds. I've never really understood that. But the parks are the lungs of New York, and that's the open space that we're going to depend on them even more.
How can New York City implement preventative measures for the future and a way to deal with the pandemic in a way that doesn't encourage a racist rhetoric or behavior towards Chinese American people and their culture?
It's a really important question. There's been a vast rise in anti-Asian acts, rhetoric, and public displays of this. I think the first part is takes leaders to set the example. I think we have to recognize that this disease is affecting everyone. It didn't, we now know much of it came from Europe, not from China, but I think the other part is that, the way to do this is to make it clear that we're going to prosecute and punish racism. And second part is, I think the elected officials should be very active. I remember after 9/11, Mayor Bloomberg went to mosques, and so did Mayor Giuliani. I think this current mayor is going to have to do much more to be aware. He's been suffering a lot because of his school chancellor's misguided policies, so he's going to have to do even more to win the trust. The Asian community is going to be highly politically motivated. They've been shortchanged by gerrymandering in Queens, especially, of getting adequate representation. We do have one Asian American woman, Grace Meng, in Congress, but the Asian American population is a very important part of our city, and they have to, I really hope, because they're dispersed, they've been less able to get representation. I think this is going to be a big battle. They have to fight hard in the primaries, and I think they will. And I think the second part I think it's really important is that elected officials have to fight every time there's any incident. And I really mean they have to go out in that area and demonstrate that they're not going to tolerate.
How do you predict this will impact ideals and urbanism and dense living in New York City? Do you think wealthier New Yorkers will flee the city?
I don't know what wealthy New Yorkers will do. I think that the history of civilization is moving from agricultural areas to cities. People go to cities because of choice, because of the opportunities. And New York is the greatest place of choice. That's why we attract people from around the world. And we have to maintain that environment. And that's why it's going to be important to invest in kind of measures to assure health. What makes New York so great is that you can be anyone you are at any time in your life. And that's why we attract people, because they can become and connect to people, which they can't anywhere else. And I think that the city is remarkable because we've been able to draw people at all income levels, and they come here because they can improve their condition. Now, will urbanism decline? I don't think so. I think that there's a romantic view of the recovery of the small town, and we're finding out in yesterday's New York Times is a great map of rural areas. In fact, I think a county in Idaho has one of the highest densities of cases of the coronavirus. It's as I said earlier, it's the density and the interaction, the dense interaction. I want to recommend The Guardian has a great article about how the clustering of people together, the clustering is spending lots of time close, hugging, kissing, dancing, all that is, and with many people spreads the virus. I don't think that it's density alone. It's really the pattern of interaction. I think the second part is New York City's magic is the density. We can't let that be a curse. And that's going to be incumbent on the next mayor to work every minute to find ways to make sure that people have confidence that they're not at risk experiencing the city.
What short-term and long-term changes to transit ridership do you see? How long, months, years, until ridership numbers return to post-COVID levels?
Well, first, the ridership is essential. If we don't have enough riders, we don't have the revenue. And if we don't have enough riders, that means people aren't really going to work. So it's not something we can be optional about. I think I always tell people there are some things that are doable and some things that are going to take long term. The subway materials are going to have to be ones which are more resistant to bacteria. There are different kinds of poles, different kinds of handles, different kinds of materials. That's one, and they're known to the traffic engineers. I think the second part is we should find a way, and I really mean this, to take our fashion designers and turn them loose on masks. Let every rider have a mask that is high fashion, whether it's communicating what they do, what color, but we should do to masks what the athletic footwear industry has done to sneakers. They took the black and white sneaker and now we made it into a fashion statement. We should do that with masks. I think the third part is we have to invest, and I really mean this, in making sure the workers of the MTA, the Transport Workers Union, are fully equipped with whatever it takes so they are feeling good, they come to work, and the system works. If we get everybody in the subway with masks, and if we have every worker there feeling good, and then I think over time, as the virus, we have to buy enough time before the vaccine comes. We don't know when that's going to happen, so we've got to do a lot between now and then.
How will the mayoral election in 2021 reflect the need to deal with these underlying inequalities? Or do you predict we will look for a crisis manager like in 2001 with Bloomberg? How will New York ever become less divided between the haves and the have-nots?
Well, I'm going to give you my view. Everyone has a different view. This is New York. One, we should encourage as many people to run for mayor as possible with one disqualifier. The first thing a candidate should be asked is, where were you during this virus? If you were in Bridgehampton, if you were in Kent, Connecticut, if you were in Rhinebeck, you cannot run for mayor. End of qualification. If you were not here during the worst days in New York, you should be facing it, admitting it, and don't hide it behind your kids. The family in Elmhurst has kids. If you have kids, so the disqualifier, no one who is out of this town should ever be allowed to run for mayor of New York. I put that in the city charter. The second part, I think, is that, yes, we need someone who's going to attract great managers, but more importantly, we need someone who cares about the management of the city. The mayor has a very big job, so they have to bring a talented group of people. So the first part is, yes, we have to bring someone who understands what it takes to attract talent and then to let them do things. And I think most important, I want someone who understands science. because we're going to have to make a lot of investments in science here, both the day-to-day life of the city and in the long-term economic base of the city.
How do you think New York City is going to handle the increasing numbers of dead bodies and the lack of space for them?
Well, you know, that we have, there's a great video online, I hope you've seen it, of Hart's Island. New York has several islands that are underused. Hart's Island has been where we bury people. You know, not, of course, it's not necessarily a place that people choose, but that's because that's why they're there. But I think we have a sufficient amount of space in some of these islands. Hart's Island, there's North Brother Island next to it. So right now, I think, you know, we'll see how far, how many people, but they're, you know, they're being buried. Of course, you know, those are people going to be close quarters, but I think that's where we're going to put them. And I should point out, you know, that New York can find space in some of these areas. What's striking is that some of the, you know, nonprofit cemeteries around the city had been really weak on business because people were getting cremated. This is changing everything. But I think that the real point is that the Hart's Island, the North Brother Island, I think we'll find other couple areas which can work as well. I don't agree with Councilman Levine. I don't think we should put them in public parks. I think that's a ridiculous idea.
How do you anticipate the economic downturn will affect public sector hiring going forward?
Well, I think that we should prepare for hard times in hiring. We should prepare for the fact that the unions, and there are 65 plus different union contracts in the city, they're going to be under pressure to kind of limit some of the pension contributions. New York's pension contributions are going to be under stress because the stock market has declined somewhat. I think the second part is that the mayor is not going to be inclined to make layoffs initially. So they're going to have to find a way to kind of limit not just the pension contributions, but limit hiring. So I think the public sector is going to be faced with a reckoning, which is that we've added 30,000 people to municipal payroll, and they're now there. It's not going to be something this mayor is going to easily face, but the next mayor, they're going to have to learn that they're either going to have a robust economy or some way we have to control the labor costs.
Do you see this pushing our representatives to tackle climate change more aggressively, or does this issue take a backseat to the immediate challenges of the pandemic?
The pandemic drives everything to the side, except for health and I think housing and jobs. I think that the day-to-day survival of people and the risk of the disease is, you know, the dominant issue. The climate change has a very long-term kind of approach to it. So however important it is, I think that some of the immediate concerns, which will be improving health capacity and dealing with the fact that people who have no incomes should not have to be forced to be homeless. And so I think that there's going to be a change in the issue agenda, at least for the next 2 to 5 years. That doesn't mean climate change is not going to be important, but it's not going to be driving the political agenda, certainly not in Washington. And even in New York, I think that there's a humane concern which will take priority.
You wisely predicted higher divorce rates among the rich who now need to spend more time with their families. Any positive aspects on the family front?
Well, I think that I didn't realize that divorce lawyers, especially in Manhattan, are finding out that this thriving business. It's not just divorce lawyers about this. There are issues of who gets the kids when they're living in different places. But I think, yes, there are some families who are getting to know each other. They never spent so much time together. I feel much worse for the teenagers. You know, they don't really want to be with their parents. Not everyone has their own room. But I think that the physical confines of New York are a challenge. We live in relatively small spaces. It's not like suburban areas where even if you're not comfortable in your house, you go outside, you can light a joint and get away from it all. Well, here people are in their houses and apartments, and it's not easy, and not everyone has a terrace either. Do I think it's a stress on households? Yes. And I think that, but I'm most concerned with the multi-generational household where the health risk is, where someone might be ill or have a cough and they don't have a room to isolate the person. And I think that's a bigger challenge. But I think, yes, I think we've seen, a lot of changes in people spending time together more than they ever expected or anticipated. I don't think it's all going to produce divorce, but I certainly just think it's getting people to be much more aware of the other person and the other people in the household.
What do you think are the long-term impacts on New York City's freelance and gig-based economy?
This is only going to increase. And let me say why. Fortunately, in New York, the gig worker, the freelancer, is now able to get unemployment insurance. That was passed by the state. So we're good on that. And I think large firms are going to use this crisis as an opportunity to do things they might not have done. They didn't have the excuse. So if there are layoffs, they'll do some cutbacks, but they won't hire back fast. And I think that's the point where they'll hire people on a contract hourly basis rather than full-time employment. Yeah, I think this is going to be a shift, especially with remote work being so possible for so many people, not for all. And I do believe this should be a real, we do have one thing in New York, we have great power through Con Ed, so it's going to be tested because every home has now got 2 or 3 computers working, and there are some people who are either gaming all day or watching videos all day. So the broadband network is going to have to be tested as well as the electrical network. And I think anyone who doesn't think 5K is coming, this is going to intensify the demand for high speed. And I just hope that we correct the way, the Wi-Fi gap in so many low neighborhoods. But the infrastructure is going to make it possible for the gig economy to continue to be important, and maybe more important, because the ability to work without having to have an office where your employer is going to make those workers even more attractive, I think.
What kind of physical changes will we see in New York City, if any? Will this lead to a more flexible city where space can be used in different ways depending on the need?
Well, I think people are going to choose more and more to live where they work. I think there's going to be a preference. I think Lower Manhattan may turn out to be more attractive than ever because there's so much office employment in that area. I think that some of the growth of the residential population downtown Brooklyn means we're going to see potentially more employment there. I think people are going to have a desire to be closer to work, to reduce the need for mass transit, and also to reduce the kind of separation from their families. So I think being close to where you work is going to be a new value. I think that's already clear in Western Queens, but in parts of Brooklyn. But I think we're going to see that become even more important as people worry about the subway and the risks they take from it, not from the danger of the train crashing, but from the health risks. So that's one. I think the second part is that I think that there will be many more areas where we find people are hanging out at home working all the time, and so people are going to be looking for housing which gives them some capacity for that. I think that's important. And I think the parks are going to be important in a greater way because after being cooped up in your apartments, people are going to want to get out. New Yorkers, they're not going to be able to stay in their apartment. That's why they are going to go to, there's going to be a huge surge in people trying to get out and enjoy the fresh air in the city. I think that, this is going to change the way people appreciate the city. Suddenly, when you finally get out of your apartment, you're going to say, my God, it's worth it waiting online for a cup of coffee.
Do you have an early favorite for the mayoral race?
Now, I feel that this is a chance for people who might not have been in politics to enter. We've learned a lot, and the internet has allowed people to become prominent. I think that I would tell you right now that we need someone who's kind of thoughtful but decisive, and I think that's a different set of skills than what we have now.
I think this makes a good final question. What gives you hope going forward?
New Yorkers give me hope. If you're willing to put up with the noise, the crowds, the congestion, you're going to get through this virus situation. It's tough, but what gives me hope? What gives me hope is that every day I see someone getting up at 5 a.m, selling coffee and donuts and bagels at the House Street subway entrance because there's no Starbucks nearby, and people are waiting online. And what I'm amazed about New York is how much they put up with day to day because there's something here they like. Whether it's, I'm not sure exactly what is the particular addiction that everyone has to New York, but I think that, what I believe is important is that it's the density of choices in New York that keep people here and attract them. We have to maintain that. And that means whether it's in business or the arts or culture or in food. And so I think it's, we have to keep this population that's here believing in New York. I think that's the biggest challenge. And I think that's the way to do that, I think, is to actually make the city safer for your health and everything that includes having clean air. You know, one thing we've seen is fewer cars, fewer diesel trucks, air is better. So we want to make sure that as long as this place is both physically safe and environmentally safe, I think that New York is going to always have kind of the energy level. And I do believe, you know, once this crisis ends, it's not going to end the way the president says, oh, just turn the button. You know, we're not going to turn the on switch. But as people gradually get comfortable and have confidence, I think you're going to see that, you know, the energy of New York will be something that people appreciate. You know, they've been deprived for so long, there'll be enthusiasm when they do the things they otherwise took for granted. So I want to thank you for this. I also want to recommend that everybody should know there are 2 more talks next week, supported by the Wagner School. And I want to thank you, all of you, for taking the time on Good Friday. Please have a good Passover, happy Easter. These are tough times, and I just want you to know it's been a privilege to talk to you today. Thank you.